We'll start with welcome. The first question is just how beneficial to you is the development of ICT in the world in third world countries, and is it sustainable?
Okay, well, actually, that's quite a big question, really. There are different views about whether it's a good idea to kind of tackle poverty at sort of sharp end, so dealing with people that have the greatest level of sort of disadvantage. But actually, I think some initiatives more recently have questioned whether, in addition to kind of like emergency food aid and those kind of things that people would argue would be a good idea. For example, Tony Blair's Africa Commission, which involved people like the President of Ethiopia and a number of other people, identified that you can only go so far with that kind of emergency aid, that actually countries need their own kind of infrastructure to be able to stop these kinds of emergencies from happening in the first place, which can be to do with having good kind of democratic structures and having good food development infrastructures and distribution infrastructures. And that then leads you into other areas, where are the technocrats who are going to be able to manage and run these things going to come from? So my personal involvement was involved in universities and higher education and tertiary education, which was not focused on emergency aid or that frontline anti-poverty work, but from a sense trying to make development sustainable, so that there were experts there who could actually manage and define these programs and run these programs for the future. So I think it's not either or, it's a question of getting a balance between short-term immediate problem solving and building for the longer term future, so that countries can avoid problems, and when problems happen beyond their control, that they can solve them themselves, kind of thing.
All right, okay. And regarding the universities, excluding obvious issues like lack of resources and outdated possible curricula, what are the other factors limiting the development of the ICT in African countries?
Well, I guess different people might have different views, but my experience was when I first started working in this area, I underestimated the extent that the shortage of skills that people have is an obstacle. So you can imagine, well, if people have got no computers, how can they learn about computers? But actually, there are quite a lot of computers around. Donor agencies have given computers in the past. There's been various different projects. You might have heard of MIT's One Laptop Per Child project, showering computers on particular schools in different countries. And it's when you realise that actually people who have got access to some of those physical kind of resources, what's the next problem they have? The next problem is, how do they use them? How do they maintain them? How do they protect them from damage? How do they stop viruses? Africa is awash with viruses. You imagine, I saw like 3 viruses in 10 years in the IT industry. The first computer I looked at in Ethiopia had 80 viruses on it. It's like orders of magnitude worse there. I'm going off on a tangent. But, essentially, I think so. The issue of skills, of how to manage IT infrastructure, how to plan, how to design IT infrastructure, all of these areas, there are very few people who've had a chance to do those kind of things for real. And so every project is having to learn how to do these things from a zero kind of start.
All right, okay. Obviously, there's different levels of ICT in different countries. Do you think that the universities that you're working with have got a similar level to the RGU, the university we are in now? And if not, how long do you think it will take to achieve that kind of level together?
There's a danger with this kind of line of thinking that you somehow view the whole job is that they've got to sort of catch up with us. I don't really see it like that, because what's the end point that you're trying to arrive at? Certainly our end point is not the same as the end point in Japan or in North America. So whose end point are we aiming for, kind of thing? And also, I've lost that train of thought for a moment, but anyway, So we don't know what kind of endpoint we're ending for. That's got to be unique to everybody to find their own kind of way. And actually, there are universities in the UK who may appear higher in kind of international league tables, but whose IT infrastructure is not as sophisticated in some ways as universities who appear lower in international league tables. So again, what level of IT infrastructure are you looking for? But in terms of resources, in terms of practical physical resources, of course, there are shortages. There are dramatic shortages. And you have to imagine that there are a range of student abilities there as there are here. So you do have outstandingly clever and intelligent individuals there who are trying to do their studies or learn stuff or do research or whatever it happens to be with very limited resources. And there are people there who succeed in doing that better than people here. So, it's like there are clever people there who are going to be clever whatever happens, and they're going to find a way.
Yeah.
They have to be incredibly talented and resourceful to do that, but they do. Right. So you just imagine the talent that could be unleashed if there was more access to more resources.
And do you think the universities are attractive for international students, for example?
It would entirely depend on what experience you were looking for. If you're asking me, should I go to Ethiopia to study?
Yeah.
Maybe if you want to learn an Ethiopian language or study Ethiopian literature or culture or something like that. But they don't. They do have international students, but coming from other parts of Africa. So you have to remember that next door to Ethiopia is Somalia.
Yeah.
If you're clever in Somalia, where would you go to university? It's absolutely it's a broken country. So there are quite a few people who go to Ethiopia to study, but I've not experienced any Europeans choosing to do that.
We've got a final question. How is the Ethiopian Telecommunications Company monopoly of Ethiopian telecommunications and their ties hindering the closure of the digital divide?
This is a political question, actually. So I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to answer what is a political decision for them, really. And it's controversial because my feeling is that African countries have been poorly served by the IMF and other international bodies forcing them to nationalise or denationalise various assets that they've had. So many of them started off with relatively centralised economies, and the IMF and others forced them through what's known as the Washington Consensus in development circles, forced them to privatise those infrastructures. And there's lots of evidence that that's served those countries very poorly. On the other hand, my experience is that the Ethiopian Telecommunications Company, which is a national enterprise, has not served Ethiopia as well as it might have done, and there are lots of comparisons that could be made with South Africa, perhaps, but arguably South African economy was a lot stronger to begin with, and so maybe it's not a very good comparison. Actually, ETC, as they know it, because it's such a mouthful of a name, this phone company, have outsourced, for example, their mobile telephone operation to a branch of essentially Orange that are running the national mobile phone network. And so I think the question, and everybody I speak to says it's now worse than it was before. There's been all sorts of difficulties of transitioning that part of what was a nationalised company to the Orange management team, and as I say, lots of people say that's got worse. I don't actually have the statistical measures to say whether that's true or not, but so the question really is whether it's nationalised or not nationalised. I think a lot of commentators have said it's not been helpful. So then the question you're asking is, well, is it to do with being nationalised or not, or is it to do with competition? Is it that it would be better if there were two phone companies competing with each other? So I don't know the answer to that, really. As I say, this is essentially a political choice that they've made.
So referring back to the first question, do you think all the money invested in all the development of ICT would it be more useful in trying to improve the living standards of the country, or is it good where it is now?
Again, these are intensely kind of political and ethical choices. There are, in development, there are lots of arguments. So, for example, in the 80s, primary education was targeted as the priority. There was fantastic evidence that if you have kids going to primary school, agricultural output increases by like 15% on average. Healthcare indicators improve, families get sick less often, the disease is less traumatic, people die less often, mortality rate. I mean, there's all sorts of measures. So everybody thought, oh, what we've got to do is sort out primary education.
Yeah.
And Ethiopia, again, an example I know best, they've pretty much done that. They've more than quadrupled the number of the percentages of primary age kids going to primary school. There are people going to villages saying, why aren't your kids in school, and sort of finger wagging their families and all sorts of things. So enrolment rates have gone up dramatically. But then what happens after that? So you get successful at that, and then you get all these kind of 11-year-olds, or whatever they are. Where are they going to go after that? Are you going to just say to them then, okay, but fantastic, you've done primary school, but there's no secondary schools for you. So suddenly you've got to think, okay, now we need to start working on the secondary sector and improving standards there and increasing building schools and so it goes on. So it has a kind of ripple effect. So the reason I talk about that is because IT is another issue that you can set. Some people think, these people haven't got water, why would we want to bother with IT? And the reason you would want to bother with IT is because how do you, on a national scale, intend to run a primary education sector, a secondary education sector, never mind companies or commercial organisations. We're living in an information age. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. There is a kind of industrial revolution going on right now in respect of information technologies. And I don't think it's legitimate to say to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, you've just got to increase agricultural output, feed yourselves, and not bother with any of this high-tech nonsense. I don't think that's sustainable, and certainly people there won't accept that. Yeah. People there can see that technology is having a big impact in other parts of the world, and they want a piece of it. And why not? I think that the danger is the diversion of resources from important short-term issues to longer-term strategic issues that IT might help with. And so inevitably there's got to be a delicate balance between all of these things, just as there's got to be a balance between primary and secondary education, and the tertiary and higher education. So there's got to be a balance between technology and other aspects of the economy. So just as it would be stupid to say there shouldn't be any IT kind of work going on in those places, it would also be stupid to say let's do IT at the expense of other things. So you have to try and find a balance, and I suspect that's for individual countries to kind of decide for themselves.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
It's a pleasure speaking. One more question. What's your favourite colour?
Green.
Green. And if you were an animal, which animal would it be?
I have no idea.
Putting you on the spot now.
Are you waiting for an answer?
I am waiting for an answer.
I don't
it's
know.
vital for the.
I'd like to be a baby elephant.
Green baby elephant. Alright, thank you very much.
Thank you.